we want to get now to Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, is on the phone with us right now. Senator, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate it.
Hey, Jeannie, thank you for having me.
What do you know?
I only know that from press reports. I've spoken to someone with law enforcement at the scene, but really know nothing more than you.
So at this point in time, that is that 3 police officers have been killed, and we know that at least 3 are in critical condition?
Yes, that's my understanding. By the way, but one thing I do know, I mean, just right now there's just a sense of grief. And before we go further, I think it's without saying that we feel for the families. And I, as someone from Louisiana, from Baton Rouge, feel for our community and our state. And as an American, I feel for our country.
Well, I have to ask you, Senator, when we heard the reports that this had happened today, and it had happened in Baton Rouge after, so many days of peaceful protests, can you just describe when you heard that this happened, how did you react?
I was actually teaching Sunday school. My wife walked in to tell me that this is what occurred, and you just wanted to sit down and grieve. I immediately gathered the children. We said a prayer for the families of the fallen officers. So I think that is the mood of our city and our state, but frankly our nation, because it follows upon the heels of Dallas. I was speaking to someone who called. She's from Dallas. Another fellow from Miami called to tell me that they were feeling what we were feeling. It is something our country right now is going through, and we will go through it so positively.
How do we move on from here, Senator? I mean, what needs to be done? What conversations need to happen?
We don't yet know the motivation. It's easy to imagine it's related to the Alton Sterling. But first, we have to recognize. Think about it, Jeannie. Last week, the police officers were protecting the constitutional right of protesters to protest peacefully, at the same time knowing that there might be threats against their lives. And I think that last part was not believed by some, and now we know how terribly true it was and is. What needs to occur is what has been occurring in our community, in which people are attempting to build bridges, in which those who might have different understandings of life seek to understand the other. That has been occurring, that it will continue to occur, and the actions of a few will not interrupt it.
I have to, obviously 12 days ago, Baton Rouge changed quite a bit when Alton Sterling was shot to death by the hands of those Baton Rouge police officers. As you indicated, just 2 days later in Dallas, 5 police officers were shot to death, 9 wounded. We now have this occurring less than a week after what transpired in Dallas. You, as a senator, where do you go from here in terms of laws or how we talk about what happens next or legislation?
First I'll say I also approach it as a doctor. I'm a physician. And first, you just have to go to those families and you have to comfort them. And that is our communal responsibility to comfort those who are hurting. Once folks recognize that, then they will be more open to building those bridges. What do we need to do as a nation? Again, we have to first support law enforcement. They are the thin line between anarchy, the Wild West, and a civil society in which we can all live freely. But we also have to attempt to understand the other. Scripture tells us to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. And it's that spirit that we have to attempt to understand one another, and in that understanding, move forward as a nation.
Can you just talk about, you just said you're a physician, you were teaching Sunday school. There were so many people in Baton Rouge today, from what we've been hearing, that they got up, it was Sunday morning, they went to their churches to worship, to start some sense of healing in the community. I'm sure you're still in shock, but what does this do mentally to this community that this happened, in Baton Rouge?
What I saw after the Alton Sterling event, which we still don't know the facts of, but all we do know is that some which you wish to use that to drive a wedge into our community. And what I've seen in our community is a resolve to work through this and to become a better city, a better state, and I can say probably a better nation. We had a telephone town hall, and a woman from a rural section of a suburb of Baton Rouge got on just to speak about, and we knew that she was white. but just to speak how there had to be a spirit of understanding so that those in Denham Springs where she lived had a better understanding of those who felt differently. Now, I think there's a resolve, and that resolve will not be interrupted by the actions of a few.
You know, Chief David Brown of Dallas talks so much about the fact that police officers aren't often thanked. He just tweeted out, "Our thoughts and prayers are with Baton Rouge police." The fact that this happened within 8 days of each other, I mean, how do we move forward as a community in helping these officers? I mean, this is a situation where officers not only in Baton Rouge but across the country are stressed out to the max.
So there's been training of police officers to de-escalate a situation. We as Americans have to say, listen, if there's any reason I wish to speak evil of another, I must stop that. And if anyone is resentful towards law enforcement, even as a casual comment, they must not say that word. There could be someone who is unbalanced, who in that imbalance might be turned towards violent action because of what someone else just said as a casual comment. And similarly, if there are those who have a legitimate grievance, they must be respected and appreciated and that grievance addressed. But we must just consciously say that we are first Americans and that we shall treat one another as Americans. And again, we shall do unto others as we would have them do unto us.
If you, if you talk to your other senators across the country, do you have advice, in areas where there have been racial tensions over the last couple years, places like Ferguson, Missouri, Cleveland, New York?
Tim Scott just gave a speech on the Senate floor, which I was privileged to listen to. And then Tim gave his, the African-American Republican senator from the state of South Carolina, and in which he gave his kind of, if you will, prescription of what we can do. And he started on a federal level, and he moved down to a state level, but then he ended up on a personal level. And it is up to we Americans, to find a way to reach across divides. Now, I will go back to what I said earlier. The lives of police officers are sacrosanct. We must support them. They live in a tension that most of us can never comprehend. But nonetheless, beyond that, we must first recognize that there is a community among us and that we cannot allow the actions of a few to disrupt that community.
I do want to ask you, because we haven't really gotten this perspective quite yet, but you have the situation that unfolded less than a mile from the Baton Rouge Police Department. Can you describe for us that area of Baton Rouge and kind of the makeup and the community that's there?
It's a mile from where I grew up. I know it very well. It's kind of a business intersection, though, but with multifamily housing down one direction and single-family homes in the other direction, a middle-class neighborhood, a typical Baton Rouge neighborhood.
The fact that you have two, you have the Baton Rouge Police Department and you have the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Department, you have two agencies impacted by this. Does that make it even worse? You have two agencies now going to have to go through. These are two agencies that worked together over the last couple weeks to make sure everyone was safe, that protected people at these protests, and now they're the ones both now impacted by this shooting today.
I think that law enforcement across our state and across our nation has been impacted. It just so happens that Baton Rouge may be one of the places most impacted. One of the stories that was coming out was that our law enforcement agencies, who perhaps sometimes there might be friction, were working together as well as they possibly could, not just within East Baton Rouge Parish, sheriffs and police, but from surrounding parishes where Jason Ard and Joe Wiley and all these surrounding sheriffs were sending their deputies to support in East Baton Rouge Parish. Again, our city and our state is attempting to come together and on multiple levels, and there will be divides, but we cannot allow this to interrupt progress that has been made on multiple levels.
You know, what do you have to say to the three police officers' families who won't have their loved ones come home tonight?
Oh gosh, what can you say except that we grieve with you, that we cry with you, that we will support you however we can. And we thank you for the sacrifice that you as a family have made for all of us.
It just seems, for lack of a better word, it just seems so sad that this has happened 8 days after we lost 5 police officers in Dallas.
It is, whether it was related, temporarily, whether it was 5 days or 5 years, we feel that sadness. There was, on a personal level, when I was in second grade, an officer named Bannister was killed in Baton Rouge, and I sat next to his son. And in whatever grade I was in, first or second grade, and I remember him drawing a picture of his daddy, and he drew that picture after his daddy had died. And I didn't know what to say, because he just lost somebody. But he still drew that picture of his father. And so in one sense, the death of these officers will stay with us all for as long as we live.
You know, because this keeps happening and, the media goes to these situations and, we report on what happened and we show the pictures of the officers and talk to their families, and everyone is so sad that this happened. What can the federal government really do? Is there anything that the federal government can do to step in here?
Well, we first, again, cannot jump to conclusions, and it's easy to imagine there's a connection with Alton Sterling, but that must be established first. But I will go back to Tim Scott's speech. There's indeed things the federal government can do, but I truly think the response begins with us. And we, again, begin by supporting those police officers, supporting law enforcement, but then working for ways to bridge a gap. Now, the federal government can do some things. Clearly, if we had a better economy and people had better jobs, things just tend to go better. There's less frustration when if we had more jobs instead of fewer jobs, and more blue-collar jobs and middle-class jobs as opposed to high-end jobs, that would be better. But that's kind of a macroeconomic level, which is important, but which does not directly affect us. I'm sure, and I know it should be, that federal agencies will be here to investigate, to make sure that things are done correctly. And the degree that we can make families whole. How do you make someone whole who's lost their loved one? But still, I think it begins with us.
We really appreciate you, Senator Bill Cassidy, being with us from Louisiana. I'm sure we're going to want to keep talking to you throughout the afternoon, just as we learn more information. As you said, you haven't even been fully briefed on everything that's taken place so far this morning.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you very much.